Hey, it's been a week since the Oscars. Do people still care about 2021 in movies? I don't know. Here's a topical joke.
Oh, wow! Wow!
And that is the only thing I have to say about the Will Smith, Chris Rock thing. Otherwise, I'm sick of hearing about it. Regardless, yes, this video was supposed to come out a lot sooner, but, you know, new place. March is a lot these days, and yeah, but video's up, and yeah, hope you guys enjoy. It's a little self-indulgent and nerdy, but isn't most of my content. So I guess most movie-inclined YouTubers will usually kick off the new year with a list of their favourite films of the past year, kind of capturing a snapshot of the previous 12 months through the lens of cinema. Is that what I'm here to do today? Yes and no. One thing I've noticed about how my film consumption and art consumption in general has changed in a post-COVID world is that I find
I don't care as much anymore about keeping up with current releases.
Don't get me wrong, there are still plenty of new films that catch my interest.
Whether I'm keeping up with the work of a favourite director, seeing something that tickles my inner fanboy, or a bit of both.
But increasingly I've found I'm far less inclined to keep up with movies year by year because,
frankly, there's so much great art out there I don't just want to limit myself to what's new and popular.
That said, if you follow me on Letterboxd, you might have stumbled across a pretty hefty list on my profile, simply titled
Watched in 2021 Ranked. Put simply, this list chronicles everything that I watched last year, in order of my personal enjoyment. Films feature-length and short, old and new, etc.
So, I thought, as a variation on the film YouTuber tradition, I'd make my first big video of this year a look over some of my film highlights of 2021. But not just a top 10 list. If you want that, you can just look at the list and be done with my misguided opinions on stuff. I thought it'd be fun to throw a little awards ceremony of my own, incorporating some of the usual categories used by more legit award ceremonies, but with a few self-indulgent additions of my own. And hey, since my parents gifted me with a conveniently malleable one-syllable name, I present to you
The Rosscars 2021.
Why am I dressed fancier than usual, you may ask? Because it's an awards ceremony, and because I felt like it. So with that groundwork laid, let's get started. I'll kick off with a more informal category, simply reeling off some of my personal film and TV milestones for the past year. This will also be a good opportunity to shout out some quality television, since that's not something Letterboxd tends to cover much. Though there are exceptions, so put a pin in that. So let's start with TV.
I finished The Wire and Buffy the Vampire Slayer, two long-term TV commitments I started with my flatmate and girlfriend respectively back in mid-2020 early lockdown days.
The Wire is absolutely one of my favourite shows now, and Buffy could be after a couple of rewatches.
I mean, it's certainly more flawed, and given everything we know now about Joss Whedon, my feelings towards it are a little more complicated.
But there's undeniably a lot that I love in it.
I also got Avatar The Last Airbender under my belt for some quality animation, and HBO's Watchmen for,
I'm just going to say it, one of the best pieces of superhero media ever made. And I say that as a long-time die-hard fan of the graphic novel. Needless to say, Watchmen is one of my new favourite shows too, as well as the aforementioned exception to TV not being included in my Letterboxd list. As for film milestones, I'll keep this fairly brief because there will be more to elaborate on later, but I did earn a few film buff points in 2021
by watching my first Paul Thomas Anderson film, my first two Andrei Tarkovsky films, and the Godfather trilogy for the first time. I also finally got round to the original King Kong and Godzilla,
the latter of which manifested in a slight hyperfixation which might become apparent in some later entries. Speaking of which, I think it's about time we get on with the main show. So first of all, I'm going to rip the band-aid off and get the undesirables out of the way first. Crazy though this might seem, I don't generally go out of my way to watch bad movies, and I'm happy to report I think I enjoyed most of my new watches of 2021, but I'd be lying if I said there weren't some stinkers in there too. With all of the Rosscar categories going forward, I'll present 4 nominees before I announce the winner, or I guess in this case the loser. So let's get this over with. Here goes.
My first nominee is The Fanatic. This is a movie that some people have latched onto as a so bad it's good cult favourite, but personally, I couldn't even get that out of it. I'll give credit to John Travolta for channeling some fun, high camp energy in his performance, and also to Devon Sawa for legitimately trying, but the sluggish pacing, stupid script, and incompetent direction just can't keep up with either of them. But then I suppose I shouldn't have expected much from the directorial debut of Limp Bizkit's frontman. Next up, Halloween 6, The Curse of Michael Myers.
So my girlfriend and I ended up doing a bit of a deep dive on more of the Halloween series after we saw Halloween Kills in the cinema, and yeah, this one was as much of an incompetent mess as I'd heard.
Apparently the producer's cut is better, at least with less seizure-inducing editing, but honestly I struggle to think of any version of this film that would have been good. Speaking of sequels/reboots that nobody asked for, Home Sweet Home Alone. While I actually do think the idea of making the burglars more sympathetic and the kid an irredeemable little shit could have been interesting, the Disney execs that slapped this together clearly had no creative ideas whatsoever and made something impressively uninspired.
And finally, I guess it's a rite of passage that anyone who becomes a fan of the original cartoon has to experience this dumpster fire.
The Last Airbender. As its own thing, it's boring, cheap-looking and clunkily paced. As an adaptation, it's fucking insulting. Even putting the whitewashing aside, some of my favourite characters are completely neutered. Like, how do you make Sokka, one of the most fun and energised characters I've seen in all of animation, this boring?
Look how they massacred my boy.
So, as I'm sure you're all dying to know, my worst first watch of 2021 was...
Home Sweet Home Alone.
Yeah, as bad as the other three nominees were, they at least felt like they were made by people. This movie feels like it was made by a committee.
And for something with a Disney budget, it looks like shit. You could tell me this was a made-for-TV sequel from the mid-2000s and I would honestly believe you. It earns a couple of points for a glorious cameo from Buzz McAllister, but otherwise, this is the most profoundly obnoxious, unnecessary, and soulless thing I've seen since the Lion King remake.
I do feel bad for little Archie Yates, though.
Let's get him in more movies of Jojo Rabbit quality soon, please.
Alright, so on to stuff I actually liked. I watched a very solid selection of short films this year. I don't think I actually disliked any of them, but some definitely stood out from the crowd, so without further ado, here are my 4 nominees for favourite short film.
Firstly, Coming Out.
So yeah, I kind of accidentally became a Godzilla fan over the past year to the point where I was rinsing YouTube for short films about the big guy.
Though this adorable piece of stop motion is more about Godzilla Jr., or Minilla, and their titular coming out to Big G, who turns out to be a wonderfully supportive dad to his trans kid.
Godzilla says trans rights.
Next up, Foxfires. While I know next to nothing about Finnish mythology, this gorgeously animated rendition of the Aurora Borealis folktale has cute character designs, a hypnotic score, and an accessible and educational take on the story. Quality stuff. Next, something that uses cute animals for far more of a gut punch, Save Ralph. Produced by the Humane Society of the United States and starring Taika Waititi as the titular tester rabbit, the stop motion is beautifully rendered and the message is one that, sadly, people still don't seem to be paying attention to.
Yeah, while I'm here, fuck animal testing.
And lastly, something completely different, Treevenge.
Nothing says Christmas like vengeful murderous virtues, right?
Made by the same people behind Hobo with a Shotgun, this is one of the most hysterically twisted and surprising shorts I've ever seen, and honestly one of the better examples of Christmas-themed horror around.
And my winner for favourite short film is...
Treevenge.
Look, I know Foxfires is more educational and Coming Out and Save Ralph have more urgent messages, but if you know me well, you know I love horror.
And I especially love horror comedy when it's done right. I knew I was going to love Treevenge from the moment it opened with a Cannibal Holocaust homage, and it only gets more insane from there. It maybe goes a little far in a couple of places, and you definitely need a strong stomach for gore and dark humour, but I kind of loved how unapologetically insane and mean-spirited it was.
Now for my next category, which is arguably the main thing I use Netflix for at this point, comedy specials. I saw a decent amount this year of variable quality, but again, I do have 4 standouts that I'm happy putting forward as my nominees.
First up, Adam Sandler, 100% Fresh. Uncut Gems reminded me that the Sandman can be a legitimately great actor, and this special reminded me that he can be genuinely funny too. A fun collection of mostly silly musical comedy that gets surprisingly poignant towards the end, this is also one of the more interestingly edited comedy specials I've seen as it jumps between him performing in different venues. Good stuff.
We all know a guy with weird allergies. We all know a guy who sneezes in threes. So how come we don't know who my real father is?
Next, Bo Burnham Inside. Yeah, I'm sure this is no surprise to anyone who knows me well. Bo's songwriting and performing is as sharp and funny as ever, but it's the added subtext of COVID and its impact on his mental health that makes it so much more and so damn good.
There it is again, that funny feeling, that funny feeling.
Next up, another effortlessly talented skinny white boy, James Acaster, Cold Lasagna, Hate Myself 1999. His usual chaotic, self-deprecating humour is still here with a bit more of an edge than before, combined with a few well-placed harsh truths.
They'll all be checking their privilege on the way home now, thanks to you brave little cis boy.
And my final nominee, Michael Che, Shame the Devil. I'll admit I found his jokes a little hit and miss, but the ones that got me were really damn funny, and I do love the honest energy he brings to his performance. Also, his closing remarks on black mental health definitely left me with some food for thought.
If you knew that I smoked crack for 1 week every month, and then one day you see me outside butt naked in Timberlands trying to sell a refrigerator door, you're like, Che, you smoking crack this week? Why would you ask me that?
And my winner for favourite comedy special is, probably quite predictably,
Bo Burnham Inside. It honestly feels a little reductive to call this a comedy special because, like I said, it is so much more than that. It's a feature film, it's a one-man rock opera, it's a time capsule of quarantine and the impact it had on all of us, and the fact that he essentially made it by himself in his house with minimal crew is nothing short of incredible.
Okay, I'll be the first to admit I don't watch nearly enough documentaries, so that's why I've grouped miniseries and features together in the same category here.
My first nominee is the miniseries Don't Fuck With Cats. I sort of have the same issues with this that I do a lot of Netflix true crime docs, namely some pacing issues and an occasionally exploitive handling of its subject matter, but I can't deny it's a compelling, if deeply screwed up story that held my attention from beginning to end. Next up, Gimme Shelter. What started as a purely observational attempt to document the Rolling Stones on tour ended up capturing a decade dying in real time. 1969 seems to have been a cultural reset in many ways, and this film is just one reason why. Next, the deeply bittersweet Disney Plus original, Howard. The second half of this is definitely more compelling than the first, presumably due to a lack of archive footage of Howard Ashman's early life, but it's still a touching tribute to a wonderful talent lost too soon. And finally, last year's Oscar and BAFTA winner, My Octopus Teacher. I've seen a few people dunking on this film since its multiple wins, and I'm not really sure why. Sure, it's a little self-indulgent, but it's still a fascinating and beautiful look at a really wonderful creature.
And my winner for favourite documentary is...
Gimme Shelter. I love the Rolling Stones, and while this film features some pretty spectacular concert footage of them, that hardly seems to matter by the end. Mick Jagger's face as he watches the footage of Meredith Hunter's stabbing is haunting and heartbreaking, and it caps off a brilliant time capsule of the end of the 1960s.
Okay folks, from here on out we're talking about my main jam, fictional feature films, plus one miniseries because I couldn't fit it in anywhere else. For favourite aesthetic I'm including cinematography, colour grading, production design, art direction, costume design, basically anything that makes a film visually appealing, or unappealing if that's what it's going for.
First up is my new favourite Wes Anderson film, Fantastic Mr. Fox. The colour palette is all rich oranges and golds, and the pitch-perfect model designs for every character help make this one of the most effortlessly charming animated films I've seen. Next, Godzilla King of the Monsters. While I wasn't as hot on this film as a lot of G fans, I can't deny it looks spectacular. Despite some occasionally on-the-nose imagery, the monsters are framed in a way that brilliantly conveys their sheer scale, and they all seem to have their own colour scheme. Gold for Ghidorah, orange for Rodan, and atomic breath blue for Godzilla himself. Great stuff. Now for something completely different, Promising Young Woman.
I had mixed feelings about this film to say the least, but the things that worked were pretty great.
And the juxtaposition of sordid subject matter with a soft pastel aesthetic, primarily in the art direction and costume design, definitely worked in its favour. And last but certainly not least, Sorcerer. If I could use one word to describe this film, it would be grimy. Muddy browns and blood reds fill the screen, with occasional bright pops of orange from the flames or green from the forest. It's a nasty, visceral movie on every level, and the aesthetic really cements that.
And my pick for favourite aesthetic is
Fantastic Mr. Fox.
This was always one of my favourite Roald Dahl books, and I think this may be the best film adaptation of one of his works I've seen.
The autumnal atmosphere seeps through every frame, so even when the tension ramps up, it never loses its charm. Add to this some truly inspired material choices on the animator's part, Cellophane for Water being my personal favourite, and we've got a clear winner.
Next, my favourite soundscape. This encapsulates both sound editing and mixing, on top of any well-considered score and soundtrack choices that elevate the film's story to the next level.
First up, The Matrix Resurrections. Obviously the music's great, from the grand sweeping score to the inclusion of White Rabbit, and let's be real here, sci-fi world building is always a great opportunity for sound design.
Set and setting, right?
Next, Sound of Metal. Admittedly, I've no way of telling how accurate a portrayal of deafness this movie is, but I imagine it's pretty spot on in conveying how scary and soul-crushing an experience losing your hearing must be, especially in a profession that relies on it. Next up, returning nominee Sorcerer. On top of Tangerine Dream's pounding synthy score, there are so many sounds in the mix that sell the utter desperation of this story, whether that's a piercing gunshot or the roar of the truck's engines in a tropical storm. And finally, my mini-series outlier, Watchmen. Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross's score is punchy and intense, accompanied by some downright inspired soundtrack choices. From Natalie Dawn's beautifully haunting cover of Careless Whisper, to Mozart's Requiem serving as a leitmotif for Adrian Veidt. Fantastic stuff.
How long have you lived in Tulsa?
5 years. 6. Almost 6.
And my winner for favourite soundscape is
Sorcerer. This and the original French film The Wages of Fear have very different ways in which they convey their almost unbearable tension, but for the kind of movie Sorcerer is, I think the sheer sensory overload of this soundscape works perfectly.
Now the most exciting category for me, Best Editing. As an editor myself, this is maybe what I'm most qualified to talk about, as I like to think I've got a pretty good handle on pacing and tone and how they can tell a good story. Or maybe you'll hear my nominees and think I'm full of shit. One way to find out.
Firstly, the film that popped my PTA cherry in 2021, Boogie Nights. How a 26-year-old made a movie this good is incomprehensible to me, but Dylan Ticknor's editing probably helped a lot. The first half moves along at a breakneck pace, selling the excitement and glamour of Dirk Diggler's rising status, with the more deliberate pace of the latter half selling the fall from grace as reality sets in.
Sir, we gotta split, man. We gotta go. Aw, come on, you just got here. I know, party. Somewhere else to go, you know, sure. Yeah, I gotta go get my friend. We're not leaving yet.
Next up, The Godfather. While I overall prefer Part 2 as a film, the way the story unfolds in the original is pitch perfect. Michael Corleone's rise to power is perfectly mapped out, and punctuated by some particularly standout scenes, one of which I might go into more detail on later.
Mike, you don't come to Las Vegas and talk to a man like Mo Green like that!
Fredo, you're my older brother, and I love you. But don't ever take sides with anyone against the family again.
Sticking to the 70s for a while, next is Martin. Yeah, I loved George Romero's take on a vampire film as much as you'd expect, and
while I'm a little iffy on directors editing their own stuff, he really nailed it here.
There are a lot of jarring cutaways and uncomfortable close-ups that sell the disturbed nature of our protagonist perfectly, making for a brilliantly uncomfortable viewing experience. And finally, once again, Sorcerer. Both snappy and unbearably tense, the way this film is paced is just one other thing I love about it.
And my hopefully well-considered pick for best editing is
Sorcerer. The efficiency at which Bud Smith and Robert K. Lambert set up our characters' seedy backstories, juxtaposed with the prolonged, white-knuckle nature of the truck journey in the latter half, is utterly brilliant. More suspense than you can check a Hitchcock at, and I'm just getting started on this movie.
Now for some acting shout-outs, and I think something that gets overlooked a lot at more prestigious or established or real award ceremonies is ensemble casts. As for 2021, I watched a lot of movies with great casts, but these were my standouts.
First, Event Horizon. Kind of a who's who of late 90s genre actors. Obviously Sam Neill and Lawrence Fishburne are the main players here, but everyone else is great too. Progressing from a believable crew camaraderie to the insane Lovecraftian horror of the final act, the likes of Jolie Richardson, Jason Isaacs and Sean Pertwee all sell the confusion and terror perfectly.
I've almost got it. You stay with me, Justin. Come on now, open that door.
If you could see the things I've seen, you wouldn't try to stop me.
No, that's not you talking. That's not you talking. That's it. That's it. Right there, open the door. Go for that button, come on. Okay. Okay.
Next, The Suicide Squad. One of many things I love about James Gunn's films is his ability to build a believable rapport between the characters, and this is on full display here. Helped in no small part by some of the most charismatic actors working in Hollywood today.
Waller told us that you were... are you drinking tea?
This is Sol Soria. She's the leader of the Freedom Fighters, the resistance trying to take down the current government. They saved my life.
Oh. Wow.
Next, something a little more out there, Titus. It's safe to say you need a great cast for Shakespeare, and everyone in Julie Taymor's ambitiously anachronistic adaptation,
try saying that 3 times fast,
is wonderful, balancing gut-wrenching drama and high camp perfectly.
Is black so base a hue? Sweet blouse, you are beauteous blossom, sure. Villain, what hast thou done? That which thou canst not undo.
Thou hast undone our mother.
Villain, I have done thy mother.
And lastly, returning nominee Watchmen. HBO shows are known for their great cast, and this is no exception. Regina King is a fantastic and compelling new lead, with Jeremy Irons and Gene Smart serving as great, jaded, and older versions of the classic characters.
Yet the monster will not have come from another dimension at all. Will have come from me. A hoax, Mr. President. An elaborate, meticulously engineered hoax to save the world.
And my pick for favourite ensemble cast is
The Suicide Squad. While Idris Elba and returning fave Margot Robbie were always going to be great leads, everyone is on top form here. Joel Kinnaman actually made me care about Rick Flag this time around, and the likes of John Cena and Daniela Melchior did a lot to flesh out the team.
Next, my favourite supporting performance. I see no reason to separate actor and actress here, since there are a lot of great performances from both sides. As for my chosen nominees, though...
First, Ingenue Ellis in King Richard. While Will Smith was obviously the big winner, I feel like Ingenue Ellis deserves more credit, because her portrayal of Brandy Williams sort of became the heart of the film for me.
They're not going to Wimbledon like this. Not with you and me on those raggedy courts. This is their life. You gotta let them decide.
Next, Brad Dourif in Halloween 2.
Rob Zombie's Halloween duology has problems, don't get me wrong, but there's a lot that I love about the second one in particular. Especially how it handles trauma and PTSD.
And Brad Dourif's heartbreaking portrayal of Sheriff Brackett really helps to drive those themes home.
There's an innocent girl here I might have kept safe for your greedy fucking book. I want to shoot you. I want to shoot you so bad. I want to shoot him. God, shoot him! I want to fucking shoot him! You son of a bitch! You don't deserve to live!
Speaking of heartbreaking performances in genre movies, Takashi Shimura in Godzilla. I mean, if you want dramatic weight to your kaiju movie, getting an Akira Kurosawa Illumini is one way to do it. His portrayal of Dr. Yamane adds wisdom and a deep sadness to the proceedings, and it's really, really wonderful.
もし水爆実験が続けて行われるとしたら、あのゴジラの同類がまた世界のどこかへ現れてくるかもしれない。
Finally, another more recent release, and a pleasant surprise to boot, Willem Dafoe in Spider-Man No Way Home.
Yeah, I was not prepared for just how terrifying his Return to the Goblin was going to be.
Dare I say it, I think he may have actually improved on his performance in the original Raimi film.
Struggling to have everything you want, while the world tries to make you choose. Gods don't have to choose. We take.
And my winner for favourite supporting performance?
Ingenue Ellis. Yeah, this performance has definitely been overlooked a lot, as evidenced by the fact that I struggled to find any substantial clips of it online, but she was easily my favourite part of what was already a wonderfully heartfelt film.
Now for my favourite lead, and man, this was tough to narrow down.
First, probably not surprising, Al Pacino in The Godfather Part 2. There aren't many actors who play gangsters as well as Pacino does, and in the sequel he really elevated Michael Corleone to the next level.
Tom, you know you surprised me. If anything in this life is certain, if history's taught us anything, it says you can kill anyone.
Next up, the late great Chadwick Boseman in Ma Rainey's Black Bottom. While this film's roots as a play are very obvious, I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing, and the weight Boseman brought to the character of Levy really made it work.
I can say yes sir to whoever I please. What you got to do with it? I know how to handle white folks. I've been handling them for 32 years. Now you gonna tell me how to do it? Just because I say yes sir don't mean I'm spooked up by him. I know what I'm doing. Let me handle him my way.
Next is Suzu Yamada as Lady Washizu in Throne of Blood, Akira Kurosawa's samurai retelling of Macbeth. While Toshiro Mifune's twitchy, scowling tone as Lord Washizu is great too, it's the eerie quietness of Yamada's performance that makes this version of the story so chilling.
あの声をなんとお聞きになります。天がかけたか。私にはそう聞こえます。
On the total flip side, my final pick is Matthew McConaughey in Killer Joe. While it takes a while for Joe to show who he truly is, McConaughey's final explosion of sadism is as terrifying as you'd expect.
To my future wife.
When's all this supposed to take place?
Well, we're leaving right after this delicious meal.
So yeah, a lot of theatre adaptations. Go figure. As for my winner though, I'm going for one purely of cinema.
Al Pacino in The Godfather Part 2. His portrayal of Michael Corleone is both haunting and tragic, and as much of a powder keg as Tony Montana was in Scarface, I find Michael's quiet threats so much more unnerving. Phenomenal stuff.
Alright ladies and gents and various non-binary film fans, we're on the home stretch, and kicking it off is my secondary interest in filmmaking, screenplays.
First up, returning nominee Boogie Nights. Again, PTA wrote this when he was 26, which blows my mind in the same way as Matt Damon and Ben Affleck writing Good Will Hunting at around the same age. Taking a subject matter this seedy and turning it into a story that somehow feels uplifting and triumphant by the end is really damn impressive. Next, The Handmaiden. Park Chan-wook and regular co-writer Seong Kyung-jung created one of the most genuinely surprising and well-paced erotic thrillers I've ever seen. Almost certainly a nominee for the Good for Her cinematic universe. Next up, staying on the theme of great thrillers, Strangers on a Train. Directed by Alfred Hitchcock with a writing team led by Raymond Chandler. Come on, that's just a tailor-made package for a great film noir.
And finally, I guess this is technically a collection of teleplays, but I'm still counting it.
Watchmen. This show manages to honour the legacy of the graphic novel and craft a compelling new story in its own right, in a way that's really impressive and admirable.
And the winner is...
Watchmen. It feels like such a natural evolution of the original story, and the way it expands the mythology and ties it into contemporary themes of race and generational trauma is absolutely ingenious. Some of the best world building I've ever seen too.
Moving nicely on from favourite screenplay is my pick for Best Director.
First is Andrei Tarkovsky for the movie that finally got me into his filmography, Mirror. This was possibly a strange choice to start with, as I've heard it's his most personal film, straight up autobiographical in parts, but the simultaneously familiar and otherworldly environment he crafted is hypnotic and spectacular. Next, Claire Denis for Beau Travail. She shoots the male forms of these soldiers in such a hypnotic and balletic way that it's easy to forget how toxic a brand of masculinity it is they're perpetuating. Brilliant stuff.
For a more recent pick, I've got to give some love to my boy James Gunn
for The Suicide Squad. While seeing a different filmmaker handle these characters every few years could be very interesting, I do think Gunn was the perfect pick. Equal parts irreverent, gnarly, and weirdly heartfelt, he's exactly the kind of director this oddball team of supercriminals needed. And last but not least, William Friedkin for Sorcerer. Say what you will about the man, but he knows how to craft a brilliantly intense movie, and for me that's no better displayed than here.
Pick for Best Director is
William Friedkin for Sorcerer. He shoots the trucks like he's making a monster movie, and the visceral tension and scale of the film is absolutely spot on.
Now, just for a fun interlude before we get into the big one, I wanted to pick a favourite scene or sequence from my new watches of 2021. Obviously there were a lot of great moments to choose from, but the four I ultimately picked for my nominees interestingly fell into two fairly well-defined categories. The first is sequences of wholesale death and destruction with an oddly mythic and godly quality, for which we have
the atomic breath scene from Shin Godzilla and the baptism murders from The Godfather. Both are pivotal turning points in their respective movies, and both are simultaneously beautiful and horrifying. Scenes like the atomic breath destruction are a big reason why Shin is my favourite Godzilla film, cementing this creature as a truly apocalyptic force, as well as the most simultaneously frightening and sympathetic Godzilla's been. As for the baptism murders, well, I don't think the film would be as iconic as it is without this scene. It's the moment where Michael Corleone truly becomes the titular Godfather, both figuratively and literally.
Do you renounce Satan?
I do renounce him.
Category 2 is bittersweet moments of our protagonists simply enjoying a song that means a lot to them.
For which I have the ending of Beau Travail and the lip-sync dance from the Skeleton Twins. Beau Travail's ending I'm honestly not going to say much about, because if you don't know it, it's really worth going in as blind as possible. Suffice it to say though, it's really something special. As for the Skeleton Twins, it's such a lovely, cathartic and genuinely human moment in a movie full of all the warts and complexities of human relationships.
my pick for favourite scene is
the baptism murders.
Honestly, sequences like this are why The Godfather was one of my nominees for Best Editing.
It's such a perfect juxtaposition of the importance of family to the Corleones with the brutal reality of the violence that shapes their world. Haunting, beautifully shot, perfectly paced, simply iconic.
So, the moment we've all been waiting for. My overall favourite new watch for 2021. All four of these really struck a chord with me for one reason or another, but obviously, there can only be one winner. Still though, my nominees are
Beau Travail, Claire Denis' hypnotic look at the performative masculinity of the French Foreign Legion by way of a loose Herman Melville adaptation. Tragic, sensual, beautiful stuff. Mirror, the film that popped my Tarkovsky cherry and perhaps the purest look at him as an artist I could have hoped for. It honestly makes me wish I had a more thorough understanding of Soviet history to fully appreciate it. Sorcerer, the rare American remake that, for me at least, surpasses the French original. William Friedkin's especially gnarly adaptation of Georges Arnaud's original novel is, quite simply, one of the most visceral things ever put to celluloid. And finally, Watchmen. An emotional, existential, and thoroughly gripping modern superhero story, this hit my sweet spot as both a fan of the original graphic novel and of quality television. An absolute masterclass in both style and substance.
And my favourite first watch of 2021 is
Sorcerer.
Look, if you prefer The Wages of Fear, honestly, I get it.
In many ways I think they're equally brilliant, and which one you deem better just comes down to personal taste. And for me, Sorcerer has the edge because, for one thing, I have a soft spot for the 70s aesthetic, but also the desperation these characters feel from the backgrounds they're escaping feeds into the suspense of the nail-biting premise perfectly.
And like I said, Friedkin was absolutely the perfect director for this.
The imposing frames of the vehicles complement the sensory overload of the soundscape to make us feel their power and danger at every agonizing step.
Sorcerer is easily one of my new favourite movies, and if you like suspense done right, I really can't vouch for it enough.
So, for a full recap, worst first watch of 2021, Home Sweet Home Alone. Favourite short film, Treevenge. Favourite comedy special, Bo Burnham Inside. Favourite documentary, Gimme Shelter. Favourite aesthetic, Fantastic Mr. Fox. Favourite soundscape, Sorcerer. Best editing, Sorcerer. Best ensemble cast, The Suicide Squad. Favourite supporting performance, Anjanou Ellis in King Richard. Favourite lead performance, Al Pacino in The Godfather Part 2. Favourite screenplay, or teleplay, Watchmen. Best director, William Friedkin for Sorcerer. Favourite scene, The Baptism Murders in The Godfather. And favourite first watch of 2021, Sorcerer.
So yeah, that about does it. If you enjoyed this, please consider giving it a like, leaving it a comment, subscribing, all those things that the YouTube algorithm likes, because I do have some more fun, geeky video ideas planned for this new year, so keep an eye out if this kind of film-centric rambling seems like it might be your thing. In the meantime, thanks for watching, thanks for listening, and yeah, belated Happy New Year. Go watch some good movies.